Barron Trump sued after Jasmine Crockett told America he was unworthy of carrying Trump's political legacy, determined to silence her voice. He flaunted a polished image of power and destiny, but Jasmine revealed it was nothing more than a staged illusion. Live on camera, she ripped that facade apart with evidence no one could deny. So what exactly did Jasmine Crockett say that left Barron Trump utterly shattered? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The Capitol chamber was ablaze with cameras and glaring lights, as lawmakers gathered for a hearing unlike any other. Millions of Americans tuned in, breathless, knowing they were about to witness a clash that could redraw the lines of power. At one table sat Jasmine Crockett, still in her posture, every inch the attorney who had made her name by cutting through deception. Across from her loomed Barron Trump, youthful but defiant, carrying the weight of a dynasty on his shoulders and determined to silence the woman who had wounded his pride. The charge was simple yet explosive. Barron had sued Jasmine after she looked into a bank of cameras and declared word for word he is unworthy of carrying Donald Trump's political legacy. That single sentence hit like a grenade, ricocheting across headlines, cable panels, and social media feeds. Trump loyalists demanded vengeance. Jasmine's allies called it courage. The atmosphere inside the chamber was electric, every breath sharp with anticipation. Was this the day Barron Trump would reclaim honor, or the day Jasmine Crockett shattered a dynasty in front of a nation that refused to blink? The chamber was still buzzing from the echo of Jasmine's sharp words when the chairman gave the floor to Barron Trump. He rose slowly, straightening his jacket as if preparing for a coronation, not a confrontation. His eyes swept the room with calculated defiance, and the cameras zoomed in to catch every flicker of confidence on his face. The crowd hushed, the weight of anticipation pressing down like a storm. Then his voice rang out, polished, rehearsed, but laced with a young man's fury. Jasmine Crockett Barron began, his tone loud enough to pierce through the silence, has done more than attack me personally. She has insulted my family, and by extension, she has insulted the very future of young Americans who believe in leadership, legacy, and honor. His words fell heavy, designed not for truth, but for spectacle. He spread his hands as if he were already addressing a rally, not a congressional committee. The lines between courtroom drama and political theater blurred instantly, and the audience leaned forward, hooked. Barron pressed on, eyes narrowing, as if each word were a blade. When she said, "I am unworthy of carrying my father's legacy," she spat on the sacrifices made by every family who believes in building a name for generations. She has mocked the future, mocked the hope of those who look to me and my family for guidance. This is not just about me. This is about every young person in America who refuses to be silenced by cynics. The words were drenched in melodrama, as if he believed shouting them would make them true. Then with a flourish, Barron reached for a thick folder placed neatly in front of him. He pulled out several glossy charts, waving them like trophies. "Here is proof," he announced, almost triumphant. "A survey conducted by a respected private research firm, and it shows clearly, undeniably, that the majority of young Americans support me. They believe in me. They want me to carry forward my father's torch." He slapped the chart onto the table, the microphones picking up the crack of paper against wood. The sound ricocheted across the chamber like a gavel. For a moment, the hearing room tilted into applause, but not from lawmakers. It was the press gallery aligned with Trump allies, their claps echoing, their cameras flashing as though they were covering a coronation. The spectacle was complete. Barron Trump standing tall, holding graphs that declared him the chosen heir of a dynasty. The headlines practically wrote themselves, the pro-Trump outlets already crafting the narrative that this was vindication. "Numbers don't lie," one reporter whispered loud enough to be heard on a hot mic. Barron smirked, feeding off the reaction. He leaned closer to the microphone, voice dipping into mockery. "And what does Jasmine Crockett offer instead? Nothing. She has no vision, no plan, no solutions, only insults. She is a politician who cannot build, only tear down. She is not brave, she is desperate. That is why she hides behind cheap attacks while I stand here with the evidence of support from an entire generation." His tone dripped with contempt, every syllable sharpened into ridicule. The words cut through the chamber like electricity. On one side, loyalists to the Trump family nodded, some even clapping again in defiance of protocol. On the other, murmurs of doubt rippled through the audience, ordinary Americans watching from their living rooms, wondering if those surveys were really as solid as Barron claimed. The hearing split like the country itself, divided, polarized, each side clutching its version of truth. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett did not move. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, her expression unreadable. Cameras lingered on her face, searching for cracks but found none. She simply observed, eyes sharp, as if dissecting every boast and every claim. The moment belonged to Barron Trump, but it was clear to anyone paying attention that Jasmine was waiting, calculating, holding her fire. The silence of her restraint carried more menace than Barron's shouting. The noise of clapping and shuffling was still echoing when Jasmine Crockett finally stood. She moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who knew the room was about to change. Her voice cut through the silence, steady and sharp. "Mr. Chairman," she began, "before these charts are accepted as fact, I am requesting the full release of the survey's files. I want the raw numbers, the contracts, the invoices, and every email between the polling company and the people who paid for it." The tension thickened immediately. Every camera in the chamber swung toward her, waiting for the blow. She opened a folder, tabs marked in red. Her tone was calm, but each word hit like a hammer. "The company that created this survey is called Liberty Strategies Research," she said. "And here's the problem. Liberty Strategies Research was paid directly by a Trump-aligned political group called America First Action." The audience stirred, the words sparking whispers. "This is not independent research. This is a poll paid for by a group that benefits from Barron Trump's success." Jasmine held up a stamped document so the TV audience could see it. "This is a financial report filed with the Federal Election Commission. It is not rumor. It is not theory. It is government-recorded fact. Right here are the payments America First Action transferred thousands of dollars to Liberty Strategies Research, labeling it as youth polling services. And those payments happened right before the survey was released." Her voice rose just enough to slice across the hall. The paper slapped the table with a sound that made even the microphone shiver. She leaned closer to the committee. "Line by line you can see it," she continued. "The dates of the transfers, the amounts, the exact vendor codes. This was not a survey of the people, it was a product bought and sold. A fake picture of support designed to look real." Every sentence stripped away another layer, and the chamber sat frozen, no one daring to move. Reporters scribbled so fast their pens scratched audibly. Camera flashes lit the walls like lightning. Jasmine's voice stayed steady, but her eyes were locked on Barron. "And I want the American people to understand what this means," she said. "If the poll is paid for by the very people who benefit from its outcome, then it is not a poll. It is advertising. It is spin. And it is being sold as truth." She let the pause hang, the silence stretching into dread. Then came the line that detonated like a charge. "The support you brag about is nothing but an illusion bought with money." The words didn't just land, they shook. The room gasped. Viewers at home leaned forward in their chairs. The sentence rolled through the chamber, through the TV networks, through social media feeds, leaving fire in its wake. The chairman's gavel twitched in his hand, but he didn't bring it down. He knew the moment was too big to cut short. Barron Trump, who had been glowing with smug energy only minutes earlier, suddenly shifted. His posture stiffened. His eyes darted to the charts in front of him, as if they might suddenly defend themselves. His hand went to his tie, tugging once, twice. A forced laugh slipped out, thin and shallow. The camera zoomed in mercilessly, catching the tremor in his smile. He leaned into the microphone with a smirk that was all armor, no strength. "Cute theory," his look seemed to say. But the damage had been done. The evidence was on the record, the money trail laid bare for the public. His confidence cracked, and millions watching could see it. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She calmly closed the folder, her gaze still steady. "The facts are here," she said, almost in a whisper, but strong enough to echo. "And they cannot be erased." That final note hung in the air, like a verdict waiting for the hammer. Barron's smirk lingered, but it was thin, brittle, a mask slipping under the weight of truth. And in that silence, everyone knew the illusion had been named and it could not survive daylight. The chamber still trembled from Jasmine's revelation when Barron Trump leaned forward, gripping the microphone as if it were a weapon. His jaw was tight, his smile thin, but his voice came out booming. "You think you can stand here and judge me?" He snapped, eyes locked on Jasmine. "You are nothing more than a second-rate congresswoman. You have never led a nation. You have never carried the weight of a family name that changed history. I am the son of a president of the United States." The words exploded across the room like a slap. He didn't wait for the murmurs to die down. He raised a hand and gestured grandly as though delivering a campaign speech. "While you sit here playing prosecutor, I have been stepping into real politics. I was chosen as a delegate to the Republican National Convention in 2024. I stood among leaders who shaped the future of this country. I shook hands, I made decisions. I was part of the movement that drives America forward." His tone dripped with arrogance, the sound of a young man cloaking inexperience with his last name. Reporters scribbled furiously as Barron's voice rose higher. He pounded the table, once eyes blazing. "The Trump name is not just a label, it is a legacy," he declared. "No one, not you, not the media, not even this Congress can deny that. You may mock me, but every time you say my name, you remind the world of what my family has built. The Trump name will outlast your insults." The sentence was pure bravado, designed for headlines and clips, not truth. The reaction was immediate. A cluster of conservative lawmakers banged their hands on the desks in approval, their voices rising in loud cheers. "That's right," one of them shouted, breaking protocol but not caring. The gallery tilted, half the room swallowing the performance as power, the other half watching with disgust. The clash of cheers and jeers filled the air until it vibrated like a storm caught between thunder and lightning. Barron smirked, feeding on the noise, basking in the moment like a gladiator soaking in the crowd. He leaned back in his chair with a swagger that didn't belong in a congressional chamber. "This is what frightens you," he said coldly. "The Trump legacy is bigger than your career, bigger than your accusations, bigger than anything you can throw at me." His chin lifted, his confidence swollen, every word designed to provoke. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett did not move. She sat perfectly still, her face carved from stone, her eyes unblinking and sharp as knives. The camera caught the flicker in her gaze, a look that promised patience, calculation, and a strike still to come. She gave Barron nothing, not a word, not a shake of the head, not even the courtesy of a smirk. The silence around her was louder than his shouting. The contrast was brutal, cinematic. Barron raged and boasted, his voice filling the air with fire, while Jasmine's calm presence cut deeper than any rebuttal. The room crackled with tension, the battle lines drawn, and everyone watching knew this was only the beginning. The applause from Barron's boasting had not yet faded when Jasmine Crockett rose, remote in hand. The lights dimmed and the screen behind her burst alive with headlines from across the world. Bold letters screamed out stories that had already scarred the Trump organization. She pointed directly at them, her voice sharp and unflinching. "These are not rumors," Jasmine began, her words cutting through the chamber. "In 2022, the Trump organization was found guilty on 17 counts of tax fraud and falsifying business records. That is not speculation. That is a jury verdict." She clicked the remote and another headline filled the screen. The Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, brought a civil lawsuit exposing decades of financial fraud, overstating property values to secure loans, understating them to avoid taxes. Billions were in question. That is the foundation of this so-called legacy. The room fell silent except for the clicking of cameras. Jasmine turned slightly, her gaze locking on Barron. "In Manhattan, your family's company was fined $1.6 million for a criminal tax scheme. In Scotland, regulators investigated irregularities in golf course financing. In Washington, the Trump hotel lease was forced to close under a cloud of ethics violations. These are facts, not attacks." She stepped closer to the microphone, her tone calm but heavy with weight. "And let me say this clearly so the American people understand: a political legacy cannot just be a name. It must be values." The words rang like a gavel echoing in the chamber. She pressed the remote again, and the slide shifted to a collage of court filings, fines and judgments, each date and citation visible for the record. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice turning razor sharp. "So I ask you, Barron Trump, what exactly will you inherit? Will it be leadership and integrity, Or will it be lawsuits, criminal convictions, and mountains of debt? Her challenge landed like an explosion, shaking the hearing to its core. The gallery erupted into noise. Reporters typed furiously, pushing breaking headlines across the internet. Screenshots of Jasmine's slides lit up Twitter feeds within seconds. Some lawmakers pounded their desks in protest, while others sat frozen, staring at the evidence they could not wish away. The air crackled with the feeling that something irreversible had just happened. Jasmine held her ground, eyes burning into Barron's. "This is not personal," she said coldly. "This is public record. These are the facts attached to your family's name. Pride is one thing, price is another. And America deserves to know the difference." Barron shifted violently in his chair, his composure crumbling under the spotlight. His voice snapped back louder, now edged with panic. "You're a saboteur," he shouted, jabbing his finger at Jasmine. "You hate my family, you hate our success, and you will say anything to destroy us." His words rang desperate, drowned out by the images still blazing behind her. Images that told a story no outburst could erase. The chamber was still buzzing from the storm of legal scandals Jasmine had unveiled when Barron Trump lunged for his counterstrike. He straightened his papers with theatrical care, then lifted a letter embossed with signatures in bold ink. His smile returned wide and confident as he held it up for the cameras. "This," he announced, "is proof that the Republican Party sees me as more than a name. It is a letter of endorsement signed by a group of distinguished former Republican officials. They have declared that I have, and I quote, a bright future as a leader. These are men and women who have carried this nation's torch. Their words show that I am the rightful heir to a legacy that cannot be erased." His tone was thick with triumph, daring Jasmine to swat down the authority of the letter. He placed the document flat on the table, sliding copies to the committee. "These officials do not lend their signatures lightly," he continued, almost mocking her silence. "They recognize leadership when they see it. They recognize destiny when it stares them in the face. You can try to bury me under headlines, but you cannot bury the truth written here by the very voices that built the modern Republican Party." He leaned back, smug as if the letter were an impenetrable shield. The room split instantly. A handful of conservative lawmakers banged their fists on the desk, nodding vigorously. Some in the gallery whispered approval, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Reporters bent over their laptops, already drafting breaking news alerts. Barron Trump waves GOP endorsement letter in congressional showdown. For a moment, the tide seemed to tilt, the narrative drifting back toward him. Barron sat taller, savoring the ripple of validation, his fingers tapping a rhythm of victory against the polished wood. But Jasmine Crockett was not rattled. She remained still for a beat, her eyes locked on the paper as if she could see straight through its ink. Then slowly she stood. "Mr. Chairman, if I may," she said, her voice controlled, deliberate. She lifted her own folder, slimmer than Barron's but lined with flagged pages. "The letter Mr. Trump presents looks official. It looks powerful. But the American people deserve to know who really wrote it." Her words sharpened the air. Cameras swung to her, reporters froze mid-keystroke, and even Barron's grin stiffened. Jasmine opened her binder and pulled out a printout. The projector flickered and an email thread appeared on the screen behind her, blown up for every eye to see. "This," she said, tapping the page, "is a leaked email exchange between the lobbying group Capital Strategies, LLC, and Mr. Trump's own legal team. In this thread, they discuss how to create the image of a young leader with national potential. These words are not mine, they are theirs." The phrase "create the image" glowed on the screen like a neon sign. Gasps scattered across the room. She turned another page, her voice growing harder. "In this same exchange, Capital Strategies, LLC proposed drafting a letter and recruiting former Republican officials to sign it. They outlined talking points, they negotiated fees, and they even suggested exact phrases: bright future, destined to lead, inspired by legacy." Every word Barron just recited came straight out of this script. Her pen tapped the highlighted sentences, each one another nail hammered into the letter's coffin. The silence was brutal. Only the clicking of cameras filled the chamber as Jasmine delivered the final blow. "So let's be clear. This letter is not a spontaneous endorsement, it is a product. It was manufactured in backrooms, funded with money, and dressed up to look like grassroots support. It is theater. It is manipulation." She lifted the binder higher. The signatures are real, yes, but the words they were bought shaped and sold like a commercial. Barron shifted his posture, collapsing just slightly. His hand hovered above the letter, as though he could snatch it back before the cameras captured the evidence. But it was too late. The email thread glared down at him, undeniable. His lips curled into a smirk that trembled on one side, the performance slipping. "This is nonsense," he muttered, but the microphones caught the crack in his voice. Jasmine leaned into her microphone, her eyes piercing straight through him. "Everything you have put forward today has been a script," she declared, her tone now carrying the weight of the chamber. "Every chart, every speech, every letter. It is not leadership, it is staging. It is not destiny, it is design." Her voice dropped lower, deliberate, every syllable like a hammer. "Everything you present is a pre-written script. But the truth is the one thing you cannot control." The line detonated like a charge under the hearing room floor. Gasps, murmurs, and the scratching frenzy of journalists surged all at once. Reporters rushed to post screenshots of the leaked emails. Social media feeds erupted with hashtags and side-by-side images of the letter and the exposed drafts. Lawmakers turned in their seats, whispering furiously. The tide that had seemed to swing toward Barron just moments ago now crashed back against him like a wave. Jasmine sat down slowly, her face calm, her hands folded as though she had simply performed routine business. The glow from the projector still burned behind her, the damning emails frozen in bright, unforgiving light. Across the table, Barron Trump stared at the letter that now looked less like proof of destiny and more like the smoking gun of his own fabrication. The leaked emails still burned across the projector when Barron Trump snapped forward, rage replacing the polish on his face. He seized the microphone so hard it rattled and glared at Jasmine like she had set the room on fire. "You are an enemy of the Trump family and an enemy of America." His voice cracked on the last word, but he kept shouting as if volume could erase the evidence. The gallery jolted, reporters lifted their heads, and even the chairman stiffened at the accusation. Barron didn't stop. He jabbed a finger at the screen and roared, "I demand this Congress take action against her for defaming the president's legacy." He slammed his palm on the table, each blow a plea for control that kept slipping away. He called for censure, for referral, for anything that would brand Jasmine guilty and put the story back in his hands. Cameras fed on the spectacle and boom mics leaned in like sharks scenting blood. He raised the letter again as a shield, but it looked flimsy under the cold light washing over the exposed messages. The temperature in the chamber spiked with the noise. Two conservative lawmakers stood banging their desks while others shouted for order over the swelling cries from the gallery. A committee counsel whispered urgently to the chair, and staffers moved down the aisles, palms out, telling people to sit and breathe. A Capitol police officer took two careful steps toward the dais, ready if the chaos crested. The chairman pounded his gavel 3 times before the sound finally cut through the uproar. Silence did not arrive cleanly. It dragged in ragged like a torn flag in a hard wind. Jasmine Crockett never rose to the bait. She sat still, shoulders squared, hands folded, eyes fixed on Barron, with the calm of a surgeon who had already mapped the incision. The camera found her and lingered, pulling in on a face that did not flinch, not even when taunts ricocheted off the marble. Her breathing stayed, even a metronome, against the panic beating through the room. She had walked into this hearing knowing the storm would come, and had chosen to be the anchor, not the sail. Nothing about her posture asked permission. Everything about it promised clarity. Barron tried one more time, voice hoarse, insisting she be punished, insisting patriotism required her silence. He turned to the dais and shouted again that she was defaming the president's legacy, daring the committee to make an example of her. The chairman warned him once, then twice, while aides passed notes like lifelines down the row. From the gallery came a scatter of boos and cheers, a confused chorus that made the lights feel hotter and the air feel thin. Barron pressed on anyway, demanding a vote, demanding discipline, demanding the room bend back to his will. His words crashed loud against a wall of evidence that refused to move. Jasmine lifted her eyes to the dais and finally spoke her words quiet enough to make the microphones lean closer. "Every arrow you fire only hits the dark. I carry the light you fear the most." The line slid across the chamber like a blade, and for a long breath, nobody moved. Order returned in inches, not miles, and the room held there suspended with her calm, like a lantern in a blackout. She looked at Barron without blinking, as if the storm had already passed, and the sky simply had not realized it yet. The chairman exhaled slowly as the gavel hovered, and the cameras kept breathing in unison. Then, the chamber was still trembling from Barron's furious outburst when Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone. Her eyes swept the committee, calm but electric, and then she spoke with precision. "Mr. Chairman, I would like to call a witness." The words hit like a switch. The room stilled, cameras tilted forward, and even Barron froze for a beat. Everyone knew something was coming, but no one knew what. Jasmine gestured toward the back doors. "I call Mr. Richard Halstead, senior Republican strategist with over 30 years of service to the party." The name rolled out like a stone into water ripples spreading across the room. The doors opened and Richard Halstead stepped inside. He was silver-haired, wearing a plain gray suit, his face lined with decades of campaigns and war rooms. Reporters whispered furiously. Halstead had advised two Republican presidential candidates and served as chief of staff to a Senate Majority Leader. He had been loyal, embedded in the party's core. For him to appear here, summoned by Jasmine Crockett, was unthinkable. The silence was thick enough to touch as he raised his right hand and took the oath before the clerk. Halstead settled into the witness chair, adjusted his glasses, and glanced briefly at Barron before fixing his eyes on the committee. His voice was low but steady, every syllable deliberate. "Barron Trump," he began, "is not the leader he pretends to be. He is not the heir to a legacy nor the voice of a generation. He is a product of media packaging, carefully staged photo ops, and manufactured endorsements. In truth, he has no proven ability, no tested judgment, and no record of leadership. He is simply put a creation of public relations." The words landed like shrapnel, and the room gasped as if air had been punched out of it. Every pen froze. Reporters stared at one another before racing to type, their fingers shaking over keyboards. The gallery held its breath. The cameras zoomed, and for the first time that day, Barron's bravado faltered. He lurched forward, his cheeks flushed crimson. "You're a traitor," he shouted, stabbing a finger at Halstead. "You're just a bitter man with no relevance. You turned your back on the party, and now you want to drag me down with your lies." His voice cracked, the desperation leaking through. The chairman banged the gavel for order, but the tension only climbed higher. Halstead didn't flinch. He let Barron's insults bounce off him like stones against steel. Then, with calm defiance, he reached into his folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The edges were worn as though it had been read and reread many times. He held it up for the committee to see, his hand steady. "I anticipated he might say that," Halstead said, "so I brought this. It is a draft letter I personally wrote to Barron Trump months ago, warning him not to pursue this charade." He placed the paper gently on the desk, sliding it toward the clerk. "This is my handwriting. This is my signature. And this letter proves I told him the truth before he ever walked into this room." Halstead's words hung in the air like a thundercloud, and for a moment no one moved. The clerk took the paper from his hand, slid it under the document camera, and fed it into the system. The screen behind the dais flickered, then glowed bright as the scanned text filled the chamber. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint buzz of the projector. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. Barron shifted in his chair, the smugness draining from his face, replaced by a nervous flicker that the cameras did not miss. And with that, Jasmine seized the moment. She stood, her hand firm on the edge of the table, and her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, this is the letter Richard Halstead wrote directly to Barron Trump. This is not commentary. This is a warning delivered privately long before today." She nodded to the screen. "Read these words with me." The camera zoomed in as the first lines appeared, the handwriting uneven but unmistakably human, the strokes of ink capturing more truth than any chart Barron had waved earlier. Jasmine read slowly, each syllable sharp. "Barron, you are not ready. You lack the discipline, the judgment, and the skill. You are being propped up by public relations, not proven ability. You are in every sense a political mannequin, an image dressed up, not a leader forged by challenge." The room gasped at the phrase political mannequin, the insult more devastating because it was written by a Republican elder, not an enemy. Reporters froze for a heartbeat, Then their fingers flew across keyboards as if racing to break the moment wide open. She turned from the screen, her eyes drilling into Barron. "These are not my words. These are the words of a man your own family trusted for decades. He did not write this to harm you. He wrote this to warn you, and you ignored him." Jasmine's voice grew steadier, firmer. "You marched in here today waving papers, shouting about destiny, about inheritance, about legacy. But legacy cannot erase reality. And this letter is reality." The clerk flipped to the next portion of the letter and Jasmine read again. "If you continue, you will embarrass yourself and your family. The Trump name will not shield you forever. You are not prepared to lead. You are simply being used as a symbol. If you want to serve, learn first. Earn it, don't demand it. Otherwise, you will collapse under the weight of a crown you cannot carry." The words rang like a funeral bell tolling for Barron's political ambitions. Gasps swept the chamber, spreading like fire in dry grass. Jasmine let the silence hold, then delivered the final blow. And at the bottom you see it Richard Halstead's signature. The same signature he has placed on contract strategy memos and filings over 30 years in Republican politics. That signature is on record in the archives and public documents. And this, she pointed at the screen, is the same. Identical, unmistakable. This is proof. The clerk pulled up comparison slides, Halstead's signature on Senate records, on Republican National Committee memos, on public filings. Side by side with the letter, the match was exact. Loops, slants, flourishes, everything aligned. Experts seated in the back row nodded, already preparing to confirm authenticity for the record. The effect was volcanic. The chamber erupted in whispers, shouts, gasps, and the furious clicking of cameras. Every reporter knew this was the knockout punch. Across the aisle, conservative lawmakers who had cheered Barron earlier sank back into their seats, their faces pale. Aides whispered frantically into phones, rushing updates to party headquarters. In the gallery, members of the public covered their mouths, stunned to see the Trump name dismantled in real time. On the screens of millions of viewers at home, the split-screen image told the story. Jasmine steady and unflinching. The letter undeniable and damning. Barron paling by the second. Barron gripped the table, his knuckles white. His mouth opened, but no words came. The camera zoomed closer, catching the sweat along his temple, the twitch of his jaw, the hollowness in his eyes. The boy who had entered the chamber boasting of legacy now looked like a man stripped bare, exposed to the bone. The silence stretched every second, heavier than the last. The Trump heir who had promised fire gave the nation nothing but a flicker of collapse. Jasmine did not gloat. She did not smile. She spoke with the calm of finality. This letter is the truth Barron Trump cannot run from. He was warned. He was told. And today the nation sees it. The illusion is over. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were delivered with the quiet power of a verdict that had already been rendered. The room exploded. Reporters shouted over one another, flashes blinding the air live streams, spiking to millions of viewers. The phrase political mannequin trended instantly across social media. Commentators outside the chamber screamed into microphones, calling it the moment the Trump dynasty cracked. Inside, the chairman pounded his gavel, but order was an illusion now. The story had leapt beyond the walls of Congress and into history. The camera cut again to Barron. His face was ashen, drained of color, his lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. He stared at the screen where Halstead's words glared back at him, where the signature mocked every boast he had made. He tried once, twice to form a defense, but nothing came. His silence was louder than any scream, his collapse more telling than any denial. For the first time, Barron Trump looked less like an heir and more like a boy standing in ruins. And the nation saw it. Every television, every live stream, every phone carried the same image: Barron Trump undone, Jasmine Crockett unshaken, and a handwritten letter closing the chapter on a name once untouchable. The dynasty had not ended with a bang, but with a sentence written in ink, spoken aloud for all to hear. The fallout was instant. By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the chamber, the press had already detonated the story across every platform. Within minutes, the headlines were everywhere. The letter that shook America blared across the homepage of the New York Times. The Washington Post plastered its banner with historic knockout in Congress. CNN went live with wall-to-wall coverage anchors, nearly shouting over one another as they repeated the phrase, the handwritten letter, like it was a weapon of mass destruction. Even Fox News, hesitant at first, couldn't resist the spectacle. Their ticker ran with "Letter Bombshell Rocks Trump Heir." America had been caught in a storm, and the storm had a name. Every network replayed the moment on a loop, Jasmine's calm voice reading the lines, Richard Halstead's signature projected on the big screen, and Barron Trump frozen in his chair, pale and silent, the illusion of invincibility shattering in front of the nation. Clips flooded social media, edited into montages, slowed down for dramatic effect, captioned in bold. Millions of Americans stopped what they were doing, eyes glued to their phones, their televisions, their laptops. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was a public reckoning, and it had the nation by the throat. The effect on Barron was immediate. He had entered the chamber as the confident heir boasting of legacy and destiny. By nightfall, he was a ghost. Reporters camped outside his residence waiting for a statement, but none came. The lights in his home stayed dim. Requests for interviews were ignored. The lawsuit he had filed against Jasmine Crockett, which had triggered the entire showdown, vanished from the docket the next morning, withdrawn quietly without ceremony, without explanation. His team offered no press conference, no spin, not even a denial. It was silence, and that silence screamed louder than any defense he might have attempted. Barron's political image collapsed like a house of cards in a gust of wind. Where once there had been the aura of inevitability, the son of a former president, the chosen youth delegate to the Republican National Convention, the face of a new Trump chapter, there was now only wreckage. Memes mocked him, late-night comedians tore him apart, and columnists dissected his downfall with surgical precision. The picture of him slumped in his chair, face drained of color, circulated the globe. In one day, the title of heir had turned into pretender. In one letter, the illusion had burned to ash. But the consequences went far beyond one young man's humiliation. The Republican Party itself trembled under the shockwave. Behind closed doors, panic spread. In one camp were the pragmatists, party elders, who whispered that it was time to sever ties with the Trump name altogether. The brand is toxic, one strategist leaked to Politico. We need to move on before it buries us all. In another camp were the loyalists, doubling down furious at Halstead's betrayal and Jasmine's audacity. "This is war," one congressman growled to a microphone. "We don't abandon family." The divide was brutal, and for the first time since Donald Trump had descended the golden escalator, nearly a decade before the Republican Party felt on the brink of a full-scale identity crisis. The debates raged in think tanks, state committees, and private donor calls. Some argued that defending Barron was suicide, that the letter had poisoned his credibility beyond repair. Others insisted that abandoning him meant surrendering the Trump legacy, a move that could fracture the base permanently. Neither side budged. Cable news fanned the flames, bringing on panel after panel of shouting partisans. Words like civil war and implosion became routine. The party wasn't just shaken, it was cracked wide open, the letter splitting it down the center. Out in the streets, the impact was even more visceral. At diners and coffee shops and offices and college campuses, people debated it as though it were a season finale they had all just witnessed together. "Did you see her face when she read it?" one woman asked over her lunch break. She didn't even blink. Students replayed the footage on their phones, analyzing Jasmine's tone, Richard Halstead's composure, Barron's unraveling. Barbershops, factories, union halls, all of them buzzed with the same conversation. The Trump heir had been dismantled on live television, and Jasmine Crockett had done it with nothing more than a piece of paper and the truth. Social media turned into a battlefield. Millions of posts poured out within hours, commentary layered on top of clips. Influencers, comedians, even apolitical celebrities weighed in. The phrase, "the letter that shook America," became more than a headline. It became a cultural moment, shorthand for humiliation and revelation. People joked that it should be studied in civics classes. Others argued it marked the true turning point of a generation tired of inherited power. The digital landscape buzzed with energy, and unlike most stories that flared and died, this one dug in. But in the eye of the storm stood Jasmine Crockett. If Barron had been reduced to silence, Jasmine had been elevated to something larger than herself. Reporters followed her every step as she left the Capitol, cameras flashing like fireworks. Her face graced the front pages the next morning, not just in American papers but across the world. The Guardian ran with Congresswoman of Truth. Le Monde called her La Voix de la Justice. And back home, the New York Times dubbed her the Truth Teller of Congress. The title stuck. Overnight, Jasmine was no longer just a representative. She was a symbol. Her calm, her precision, her refusal to be rattled, all of it crystallized into an image that resonated far beyond party lines. For Democrats, she was a champion. For independents, she was a breath of honesty. And even for some Republicans weary of the chaos, she was a reminder that courage could still exist in politics. In interviews, ordinary citizens said the same thing. She spoke the truth and she didn't flinch. That was the measure people remembered, not her party affiliation, not her rhetoric, but her steadiness in the face of fury. The symbolism deepened as commentators began to reflect on what had happened. They noted the irony: a young man who had boasted of destiny undone by a single letter from within his own party, exposed not by enemies but by insiders. They observed how Jasmine had not needed to shout, had not needed to insult. She had simply placed the truth on the table and let it speak. It was, they said, the rarest kind of political theater, the kind that transcends performance because it cannot be denied. The legacy of that moment wasn't written in Barron's silence, but in Jasmine's steadiness. Historians speculated that it might one day be taught as a case study how a dynasty can collapse in a single afternoon, how truth can puncture spectacle, how courage can change the arc of power. Professors began assigning clips in political science classes. Parents showed it to their children as an example of standing firm against arrogance. It spread not as gossip, but as lesson. Meanwhile, Barron disappeared from the spotlight. His allies avoided his calls. His name was whispered less in strategy meetings, replaced by newer figures rising from the shadows. The air image that had once seemed inevitable evaporated. Even his critics stopped mocking him after a while because there was little left to mock. He had been reduced to silence, and silence was no match for the noise Jasmine had unleashed. Jasmine, however, carried forward, not as a partisan warrior, but as something harder to define. She became the face of accountability, the figure who reminded a restless nation that no name, no dynasty, no family was bigger than the truth. Editorials hailed her as a truth teller in an age of spin. Protest signs borrowed her words. Church pulpits quoted her lines. She had, for that moment, stepped into the role America craved, the person willing to speak plainly when others twisted language into knots. The press kept returning to the image burned into memory. Jasmine standing firm, the letter glowing on the screen. Barron shrinking in his chair. It was cinematic, unforgettable, the kind of moment that couldn't be staged because it was too real. It felt like the truth had walked into the room, one journalist wrote. And that was what people clung to, not the scandal alone, not the downfall, but the clarity. And so in the days after one truth remained unshakable, Jasmine Crockett had emerged not just as a congresswoman, not just as a lawyer, but as a symbol of what America could still be when courage met reality. She didn't need to declare victory. The world declared it for her. The echoes of the chamber still rattled through the nation when commentators began to pull apart the meaning of what had just unfolded. It wasn't only about Barron Trump's silence or the letter that tore through his image like glass under a hammer. It was about something larger, something that pierced the myth of inheritance itself. When Jasmine Crockett walked into that hearing, she wasn't simply battling a lawsuit, she was holding up a mirror to America. And the reflection was unforgiving. The lesson burned across every screen: legacy without substance is just smoke. Jasmine's words echoed even louder once the dust settled. She had not shouted them, she had not framed them as prophecy, but the meaning was clear. A legacy is not a name. A legacy is the proof of action, the weight of values you leave behind. The line replayed in news packages, quoted in editorials, whispered in classrooms. For decades, America had watched families pass power like heirlooms, assuming the surname was the crown. Jasmine cracked that illusion open in front of millions. She made the point impossible to ignore. Bloodlines do not build nations. Deeds do. The first great lesson was laid bare: heritage means nothing if it is not carried by action. Across dinner tables, Americans repeated it to one another in simpler terms. You don't earn respect just because your dad had it. A famous last name isn't a resume. It sounded obvious, but when Jasmine said it in that chamber, the truth cut sharper than ever before. Barron Trump had tried to wear his father's shadow like armor, but armor forged from reputation alone cannot stop the arrows of reality. And reality is merciless when exposed under the spotlight. From that day, every article, every op-ed, turned the same screw lineage without labor is hollow. Students debated it in civics class. Workers in break rooms nodded when they saw the clips on their phones. Even veterans of politics, hardened and cynical, admitted privately that the moment had struck a chord. Because America at its best was never built on dynasties. It was built on sweat sacrifice and principles tested in the fire of adversity. Jasmine had reminded the nation of that creed, and the reminder landed like a thunderclap. But the lesson did not stop there. As analysts picked apart the wreckage of Barron's collapse, another truth roared to the surface. Power built on lies cannot stand. For years, the Trump brand had been wrapped in a glossy skin, polished by television lights and gilded buildings. Yet the letter exposed what the gloss had hidden: weakness, unpreparedness, fabrication. Power cannot rest on falsehoods, one anchor said solemnly during a primetime broadcast. It will always rot from within, no matter how brightly it is painted. Jasmine's calm voice had already framed the idea more directly. Power without truth collapses, she said in the hearing, her tone cutting like a scalpel. The phrase spread like wildfire because it was both indictment and prophecy. Every dictatorship in history, every fraudulent empire, every con built on illusion, they all had the same fate. They all fell when the truth finally slipped through the cracks. And on that day, the cracks in the Trump heir's armor had split wide open, impossible to mend. The imagery was unforgettable. Barron's charts, Barron's endorsements, Barron's boasts, they looked solid in the moment, but every one of them had been scaffolding made of lies. Jasmine needed only one letter signed by a trusted advisor from his own party to send the whole structure crumbling into dust. That was the drama that electrified the nation, the fragility of lies exposed by the weight of one undeniable fact. The lesson wasn't abstract. It was there: visible, brutal deceit cannot hold power for long. It will always fall. Commentators hammered the point home not with rhetoric but with examples. They pointed to history scandals that toppled senators, corporations, that collapsed under fraud, presidents undone by cover-ups. The pattern was always the same. Falsehood builds fast, but it cannot endure. It can dazzle it, can frighten it, can even win elections, but eventually truth arrives like a wrecking ball. That wrecking ball had swung in Jasmine's hand, and the sound of its impact reverberated across the country. And then came the third lesson, perhaps the one that resonated deepest with the younger generation. In classrooms, on campuses, and youth gatherings, the question spread: how do you tell the difference between inherited glow and real ability? Jasmine had given them the vocabulary. Distinguish between the halo of inheritance and the grit of true competence, she had said. It was a challenge, a dare to every young American who might be tempted to chase legacy rather than substance. The contrast could not have been sharper. Barron represented the halo of inheritance, the golden surname the stage handed to him, the spotlight bought rather than earned. Jasmine represented competence, years in the courtroom, battles fought on behalf of the voiceless, scars from real fights. When the two collided, the illusion shattered and the truth endured. That was the lesson millions of young viewers carried away. Don't mistake spotlight for skill. Don't confuse legacy with leadership. Across universities, professors ask their students, what makes a leader? Is it a last name, or is it the ability to carry weight when the storm comes? Students debated fiercely, many pointing back to the hearing as if it were their textbook. One teenager posted online, if legacy was enough, Barron wouldn't have crumbled. If competence didn't matter, Jasmine wouldn't have stood unshaken. The comment went viral because it captured what everyone had seen with their own eyes. Parents echoed the message to their children. Don't expect life to hand you respect, they said at dinner tables. Earn it, prove it, build it. The lesson became personal, no longer confined to politics. It seeped into workplaces, communities, even families. The story of Barron and Jasmine turned into a parable, one that reminded people of something they already knew deep down: only the real can survive the fire. And so 3 lessons crystallized from the chaos. The first legacy is worthless without action. The second lies, no matter how well packaged, will eventually collapse under their own weight. The third, the youth of America must learn to separate glitter from gold inheritance from integrity, spotlight from substance. Each lesson was hammered into the collective consciousness by the image of Jasmine Crockett, standing tall, a letter in her hand, and Barron Trump shrinking in silence. The drama of that day had ended in one chamber, but the meaning of it spread like wildfire through the country. Editorials framed it as a turning point. Educators turned it into a teaching tool. Citizens held it up as proof that truth can still cut through the fog of politics. The lessons were not whispered. They were shouted across headlines etched into memory, carried in conversations that refused to die down. For once, America agreed on something not because a politician had spun it, but because the evidence was too raw to deny. Jasmine Crockett had pulled back the curtain, and behind it, the truth glared bright. The lessons that followed were not abstract theories. They were simple, undeniable, written in the collapse of a dynasty and the calm of a woman who had nothing but the facts. And America watching understood. When the lessons settled over the Capitol like dust after an explosion, the doors of the hearing room swung open. The hallway beyond was a river of light and noise boom, mics arcing overhead, camera rigs rolling on rubber wheels, reporters stacked shoulder to shoulder. Security formed a narrow channel, and through it stepped Jasmine Crockett, the sound of shutters cracking like distant thunder. The marble floor reflected the flare of flashbulbs, turning the corridor into a strip of white fire. 100 voices rose at once, but her pace never stuttered, never broke. She moved as if she had measured this path long before dawn. "Congresswoman 1, comment just 1, a voice pleaded, and another shouted, "Did the letter end it?" Hands reached with microphones labeled by rival networks, red lights blinking like heartbeat monitors. Jasmine paused at the rope line and lifted her chin, not defiant, not triumphant, simply certain. She met the wall of lenses with a stillness that swallowed the clamor. Her eyes were steady, her breath, even her posture cut from clean lines and resolve. It was not the look of a victor. It was the look of a steward standing guard over the record. The cameras closed in glass eyes, drinking every detail, the tiny fleck of paper dust still on her sleeve, the faint shadow beneath her cheekbone, the glint across her pupil. "Does the public deserve more today?" someone asked, voice tight with urgency. Jasmine let the question hang, then answered with the calm weight that had carried her through the hearing. "The public deserves the truth, and the truth is on the record." The line traveled the corridor like a charge, crisp and final. Security nodded, and the crowd surged forward by inches. She stepped again, and the semicircle of press rolled with her wheels, squeaking cables snaking across the floor. A production assistant stumbled, regained balance, and mouthed an apology as the moving scrum turned down the grand stairs. Outside the tall windows, late light cut the sky into slabs of copper and blue. The city hummed horns far below, sirens, somewhere beyond, flags snapping where the wind found them. Every sound fed the sense that a pulse larger than the building was beating in time with her steps. On the landing, Jasmine stopped beneath a gilded chandelier and faced the microphones clustered on a temporary stand. The stands listed under their own tangle of cords, logos, stacked so tight they overlapped. A reporter called, "Do you have any message for young Americans who watch this?" Jasmine did not glance at the cameras to find her best angle. She looked straight through the lenses as if speaking to living rooms, classrooms, kitchens. "Tell them the same thing I told the committee," she said. "Power answers to truth." The chandelier glass quivered as the crowd exhaled. She moved again, and the marble steps spilled her toward the east entrance, where the weather found the sweat at the nape of every neck. Police radios crackled. A helicopter thumped somewhere behind the dome. The echo of shoes stacked into a single rolling drum. A gust lifted the hem of her jacket, and for a beat her silhouette sharpened. It was a simple outline. Head-high shoulders, square stride measured, and yet the cameras kept trying to fit it into a headline. If there was a symbol to seize, it was not carved by triumph, it was carved by restraint. And restraint today looked like strength. Then a shift rippled through the crowd. Heads turned back toward the hearing room doors, where staffers spilled out in a nervous knot. Barron Trump appeared half a length behind them, taller than the men in front, but somehow smaller than the shadow thrown by the doorframe. His jaw was set, but his eyes were down, not from shame perhaps, but from the weight of 1,000 lenses. He did not slow, and he did not raise his face. He moved like someone tracing the wall with his shoulder, a figure trying to outrun the light. "Mr. Trump, will you comment?" Came the volley, tight and sharp the way reporters aim when they smell a moment collapsing. "Sir, will you challenge the authenticity?" another yelled, straining over a mic stand. His aides closed ranks, hands up, elbows splayed, forming a living wedge to cut the path toward a side exit. The cameras swiveled, then wavered, uncertain whether to chase the silent retreat or stay planted on the woman who had not blinked. For a few seconds, the hall became a split screen lived in real time. Two stories moved in opposite directions, and the lens trembled between them. Jasmine did not turn to watch him pass. She held her place at the foot of the stairs, eyes on the steps ahead, listening without looking. A young producer, breathless, blurted, "Congresswoman, he appears to be leaving without a statement. Does that change your message?" Jasmine's answer arrived without flourish. "No." The single word steadied the air, as if a hand had pressed down on the surface of a boiling pot. Then softly but clearly she added, "Silence is a kind of statement." Penn scratched it down as though it were a statute. From the far door, the thud of shoe to threshold signaled Barron's exit. The corridor swallowed him with quick, dutiful gulps. A door hissed open, a flash flared and died. A metal latch clacked twice. Outside, an engine idled at the curb, and a rear door yawned like a mouth waiting for a name. He dipped into the vehicle without lifting his gaze, and for a breath, the only thing visible was the crown of dark hair over the window line. The door closed with a dull, expensive thump. The convoy slid away as if leaving a crime scene that had no need of chalk. On the Capitol steps, the air felt thinner, as if the building itself had exhaled. Jasmine reached the top tread and paused beneath the open sky, the dome curving over her like a shield. Reporters arranged themselves into a ragged crescent. Tourists who had drifted close held their phones out with the quiet hope of witnesses. Someone called, "Do you feel vindicated?" Another, "Do you worry about retaliation?" In the pause, the flag above snapped once, a clean report against the pole. Jasmine answered neither question. She gave the same thing she had given inside clarity without embroidery. "The evidence is public," she said, and the microphones leaned closer, as if they could inhale the words for safekeeping. "The record is complete." The breeze took a lock of hair from her temple and set it back in place. She did not chase applause, and no applause chased her. Instead, there was something heavier, a silence shaped like attention. It felt like the whole staircase was listening. A child's voice rose from behind a barricade, high and earnest. "Is it hard to tell the truth?" it asked, and the press line wavered, unsure whether to shush or lean in. Jasmine turned slightly toward the sound, searching, then let her eyes rest on the cluster of faces, without picking one. "Sometimes," she said, "but it is harder to live with the lie." The city noise filled the edges of the words like water filling a low place. A cameraman lowered his rig the way one lowers a flag. Flashbulbs spattered the stone as a second wave of photographers arrived, late but frantic, hoping the moment would wait for them. It did, because she did, standing there long enough for the latecomers to set their focus and breathe. The light shifted toward gold, and for a blink, Jasmine was haloed by nothing more mystical than a sunbeam ricocheting off a pane. In the viewfinders, it looked like symbolism. In life, it was simply the way light behaves when it finds a clear surface. The distinction mattered, and the cameras for once seemed to honor it. Behind her, the doors opened and closed, the echo thinning with each cycle. Staffers gathered their clipboards. A police officer adjusted the knot of his tie. A runner delivered a note to a producer, who nodded and did not read it. The scene settled without losing its charge, the way a storm sometimes lingers as heat after the rain. Jasmine glanced at the reporters and then at the horizon beyond their heads. The city lay there, the same as before, only sharper. "That is what truth does. It turns the edges of a place real." "Will you say anything else?" a network correspondent asked, voice soft for the first time. Jasmine considered, then shook her head once. The correspondent swallowed as if accepting a verdict. Penn slowed. A few cameras backed a step, as if space had been ordered, and they had remembered their manners. The moment compressed into a clean shape. It would travel that way intact into feeds and front pages. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.